Okay, shall I start? Okay, let's start. I'm going to share my screen with you all. That's all right. Make sure I'm sharing the sound. Okay. Can everybody see that first slide? Yep. Okay. All right. Here we go. Okay, so hello. As I said, my name is Kitty. If I'm going too fast or too slow, then please let me know. Please raise your hand. I'm going to give you a quick little bit of background into me and my practice. So I was a bit of a late starter, some might say. I went to university in my sort of mid-30s. Before that, I was trying to be a pop star and it failed. More or less on that later. Once I've been to university, I got a job as a creative media technician in the department that I graduated for. And I also did an MA on the employment development scheme there. Whilst I was doing my MA, I started working for community organisations, and I started off by volunteering, which I can highly recommend. And then people started offering me work and jobs. So I've worked for community organisations like Under the Stars, Sheffield Mencap, Darts. I also work for local festivals. So I've worked for Docfest, Off the Shelf, and Festival of the Mind. Again, I work with lots of arts organisations. So I've worked with East Street Arts, which is Leeds-based, Arts Catalyst, Counterpoint, Art Reach, Flux. I make a lot of public engagement content. So for places like the University of Sheffield, Sheffield Hallam, University of Exeter, Durham, York, and that's increasingly quite a big part of what I do. And I'm a musician and I'm a DJ as well. So that's my kind of background and where I'm coming to from this. So what are we going to cover today? We are going to cover a bit about structure. So how to organize and structure, how to manage, break down and distill your content into easily consumable and listenable bits. I'm going to give you some examples, both from the podcasting world at large and a few from the content that I've produced. We're going to look a bit into recording scenarios, so situations, spaces or places that you might record in and how to get the best from them. I'll touch briefly on some of the recording kit that's available to you, although I will cover this in more detail, as I said, in the partner session next Monday, the 29th, at the same time, 3:30. We're going to look at additional material, so other sounds or audio apart from spoken word that you can use to add meaning and or punctuation to your content. The dreaded copyright and compliance, the boring stuff as some people call it, but it is the necessary stuff. And we're going to talk about some tips and tools with the help of the Creative Commons, which is an international non-profit organisation that advocates for better sharing of information and resource, sharing that is contextual, inclusive, just, equitable, reciprocal, and sustainable, all the others, and it's very cool. I encourage you to go and look at that, and I'll give you some signposting for that. We're going to talk a bit about performance, so how to get the best from yourself and your guests, how to create a conducive atmosphere, how to plan ahead, and how to put people at ease. And a little bit about tech. Again, we'll touch on this, in particular things like file management, editing platforms and hosting. But again, I'm going to go into more detail with this in next week's partner session. Everybody okay? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. All good. Okay, great. So what exactly is a podcast? Well, a podcast is an audio program. Now, videos, confusingly, I think confusingly, are now increasingly also called podcasts. and they can be hosted on YouTube or other video streaming platforms, usually with a single simple image. They are available, podcasts are available online, and they're available at any time. And crucially, they're not tied to a live broadcast date and time, unlike radio. They are downloaded or streamed from the internet. They're often available as a series or a suite. And the difference between a host and a player. A podcast host, so something like Podbean or Buzzsprout or Transistor, is a generally paid for platform where you can upload and host your podcast. This in turn generates an RSS feed. RSS stands for Really Simple Syndication. A podcast player, Podcast Addict is my personal favorite, but there are others out there, obviously Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify. A podcast player is an app that curates all podcast content using RSS feeds, where you can subscribe to or search for podcasts, download or stream them to listen. And increasingly, hosts can also be players, but it's important to know the difference in podcast land. And finally, podcasts are often subscribed to. So for new installments, for instance, new episodes via a player or a host app. And again, this is where the RSS feed comes in. So a player app using an RSS feed will let you know, for instance, when a new episode is available, or perhaps there's some bonus content for a particular podcast series. Okay, so is this just repurposed radio? No, not at all. So frequency and length, this can be any. So in terms of length, you might have things that are really short snippets, and that might be, for instance, something like a weather report and something you might get from BBC Sounds. It could be 30 seconds long. Or at the other end of that, the other extreme end of that, long form interviews. So a popular long form interview podcast at the moment is Annie Mac's podcast series called Changes, which is often an hour or more of long form, in-depth conversation with a guest. So it can be any length. Frequency. Again, it can be any frequency. Perhaps for you guys, this might be likely to be either a one-off episode or a short series, but it can be any frequency. It can be a one-off, it can be daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly. And formats and topics, again, anything. Nothing is off the table. So any format, a monologue, so just one person speaking, a conversation, an interview, a multi-person or panel discussion, and fiction or non-fiction. And topics, again, any. And crucially, some of which would never make it to broadcast radio. So this is perfect for artists, art practitioners, and collaborators. It can literally be as concept-driven as you want it to be. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples of podcasts that I personally love. Now, this is just me and my personal taste, but there are some good examples of best practice in here. And again, the links for these are at the end of this. And you'll get this as a PDF if you would like it, where you can use those links. So, sorry, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat. So the first one is Ear Hustle. This is an absolutely brilliant podcast. I don't work for any of these people, by the way. I just love this. It's great. It's an arts collaboration. It's described as the daily realities of life inside prison, shared by those living in it, and stories from the outside post-incarceration. And it's a collaboration between a local artist and people who were at the time incarcerated in a local prison in California. And it's just absolutely brilliant. The artist that that has created this is amazing. She's absolutely gorgeous. Brilliant, brilliant woman. It's made by a company called Radiotopia, sorry, who are a US independent podcast network. Brilliant. Have a listen to that. And it's quite long running. I think it's probably in its maybe 5th series now. This is, oh, I love this. This is so good. The logbooks. It's described as an award-winning history of LGBTQ plus life in Britain, as noted by volunteers at the Gay and Lesbian Helpline Switchboard. Each episode of this centres around logbook entries made by volunteers who staffed the phones from the charities. This is an absolutely brilliant use of archive material. And it's also a really strong example of using different voices to voice quotes and quoted material. And this was supported, no, I think it's finished now, supported by the National Heritage Lottery Fund. And this final example is called The Skewer. This is an absolutely crazy podcast and quite short. These are only about 14, 15-minute episodes, whereas the other two, you're looking at half an hour, something like that. So The Skewer describes itself as a twisted comedy treat. John Holmes brings you the week's biggest stories like you've never heard them before. The News Remix. Again, this is a really good use of archive and additional material like sound effects and field recordings. And it's made by a company called Unusual for Radio 4. And they encourage contributions from everyone, from all sources. And you can find them at weareunusual.net to find out how to get involved. Again, that link will be at the end. You'll notice this first one in this is American, so Ear Hustle. And just to note that the US has a much larger and kind of better funded infrastructure for podcasting than we do in this country, in particular for investigative journalism. So the likes of things you might have heard of like This American Life or Serial, they really benefit from having enough funding and support to follow a story to either its fruition or to realize that maybe it's not right. It's not right for this particular content. But that can involve, again, a lot of infrastructure and support. Okay, examples of a couple of things that I've produced, which you might find worth listening to, and have some examples from my collaborators in there of best practice. So this first one is called How to Die Like a Romantic Poet. And this was made in collaboration with Off the Shelf Festival a couple of years ago by a doctor at the School of English. And she explores the romantic poets and their obsession with death and the afterlife. And in this particular piece, I made some abstract musical textures for this, and I voiced some quotes for her separately. And Madeline's delivery here is absolutely brilliant. Her enthusiasm for her subject just shines out of her. And it's also an example of a great title. I mean, who doesn't want to know how to die like a romantic poet? It's a brilliant title, I love it. Okay, this second one. This is part of a series called In Practice that I produced for East Street Arts. East Street Arts describes this as a series of curated conversations around artist development, placemaking, and more. And in this particular series, this particular episode, sorry, the Grief series, an academic chairs a conversation between an artist and a former city council worker around arts and health. And this is a really good example of brilliant chairing skills. Laura, the academic who is chairing this particular session, she really encourages her guests to share their experiences. She summarizes really well, and she also offers just the right amount of personal insight. This is a really great balance from a host. And another one here, this is a series called Changing Currents. And this is the first episode of that, which is called Contested Landscapes. And Changing Currents is a podcast series that I recorded and produced for another local arts organisation called Arts Catalyst. And this episode was recorded on location at the Longshore Estate in the Peak District. And I also made field recordings of the location and worked with an associated artist to weave these and their musical elements into the final piece. So this is an example of using additional audio material to help situate and narrate your piece. And with both of these slides, this one and the one before with examples in, I want to stress here the importance of referencing, the importance of going out and listening to other podcasts and other things that people have produced. Because as artists and producers, nothing we do happens in a vacuum. And everything we do has something to do with something that's already gone before. And we're always listening and we're always referencing. So go out there and listen and get some ideas for things that work, things that you like, maybe things that you don't like. Okay. Everybody following along okay? Quick thumbs up if we're all good. Yep. Okay, thank you. Just so I know I'm not talking into the abyss. Okay, the component parts or the ingredients, as I like to call them, of podcasting and podcasts. So first of all, the obvious one, speech, so spoken words. This can be one person, what we would call a monologue, or it can be more. It can be a conversation, an interview. The second ingredient often is music. The third ingredient often is archive footage. Now then, a little myth buster here. Any music or any kind of archive footage, TV, radio, film clips, for instance, must have the necessary permission from the copyright or IP holder. And we'll come on to this, to a bit more of a in-depth mythbuster about this on the next slide. Mythbuster, that's really hard to say. Oh, okay. I'll talk a bit more about that in the next one. So the next ingredient, field recordings. So things that signify a place or a space. And add atmosphere. So, for instance, a school playground, traffic, city noise, for example. These are, in the podcasting and audio world, these are often called beds or bedding audio, as they very often are used underneath other audio, a voice, for instance, to situate it or bed it in. So situational atmosphere or texture. Another ingredient, sound effects. Sound effects can be used to great effect as punctuation to provide a break or a gap before something new or something different starts. Or sometimes to emphasize a point, although I would say use that sparingly. And a mythbuster, see, it's really hard to say, a mythbuster applies to that as well. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. And voiceover, so other voices which can signal changes, so voicing quotes, for instance. And I just want to highlight here the importance of voice, so the importance of a narrator, a host, or a chair. This is natural signposting for an audience, and it's the glue that often binds it all together. And it's often referred to as voiceover, particularly if these particular parts are recorded after the main body of a recording or a conversation. So to provide things like links, for instance, perhaps explaining who's talking, where, or what about. Okay. Back to that word that's really hard to say, mythbuster. Ooh. Okay, nothing that you use that you've not created yourself, that you don't own the IP of, can be used without permission of the copyright holder or the IP holder. IP stands for intellectual property. So property such as a concept, an idea, an invention, or a work that derives from the effort of the mind or the intellect. Also, a right or registration, such as a patent, a trademark, a trade secret, or a copyright relating to or protecting this property. So also known as IP, intellectual property. There are lots and lots of myths out there suggesting perhaps that, oh, just a few seconds, or even a common myth here is up to 59 seconds. If it's less than a minute, you don't have to have copyright for it. I'm afraid that's not true. And if you use something without permission and further host it somewhere on the internet, it's likely that that host's algorithms will either not let you upload it in the first place, or it will very quickly be taken down. However, all is not lost. There are ways to use what we call copyleft material by crediting it properly through the Creative Commons, which is a very cool thing. So, copyleft. What is copyleft? That is the universal sign for copyleft. Copyleft is the legal technique of granting certain freedoms over copy of copyrighted works with the requirements that the same rights be preserved in derivative works. In other words, paying it forward. So you're being encouraged here to share your own work for reuse and to collaborate. And the Creative Commons is all about collaboration. It's all about, yes, there is stuff that you can use, but why don't you let other people use your stuff as well? And that's how the Creative Commons keeps going, it keeps moving. So it originated in the open source software world. However, it's now increasingly being used for other property, so audio, video, music, and books, for instance. And there are several forms of copyleft licensing, the most popular being the Creative Commons licensing. And that is the Creative Commons sign. And if you see any material with that sign, you know that it has a Creative Commons license attached. Now, licensing is done at the moment via 6 types of Creative Commons licenses. And I'm just going to show you some of them. So I'm just going to exit out of here. And you should be able to see here the Creative Commons website. And here is a list and explainer. Again, this link is in the end of this, what's it called? Slide deck, that's what it's called. So here are the list of different kinds of Creative Commons licenses. And they're different because they might ask for different things and they might have different restrictions on them. So it might be that you need to credit a maker. It might be that you can only use a particular piece of Creative Commons licensed materials if it's for non-commercial use. There are quite a few different types of license here, but this is where to find them. And this is an explainer of what each of them mean. Okay, let's go back to that. Okay, so that's copyleft and the Creative Commons. So, how can I find CC licensed material? Well, this is a good place to start, the Openverse, openverse.org. Openverse is an online tool. It's available to anyone, and it lets you search for openly licensed and public domain works. Now, currently, this only searches images and audio, with the search for video being provided through an external source. But there are plans to add additional media types like OpenText and 3D models, which is very cool. I'm quickly going to do a little demo of Openverse for you. So let's just get rid of this. This is what Openverse looks like. You can either search for all content. So as I said at the moment, that's just images and audio, or you can filter down. I'm going to filter down. I'm going to say, yeah, there's that one I looked for before. Let's say London train. And let's have a listen to this top one. So this is a really easy way to look and see content that is licensed by Creative Commons. You can see it there. There's your little CC. And if we go into that, we can play it from here. So let's say this is what we want. So we can click here and get this audio. And this actually comes from a slightly different website, which I'll show you as well. But what's really cool about the Openverse is straight away down here, look, we've got this accreditation. So really quickly, you can see exactly how you need to credit that creator and how they've asked that you credit them. And that's a piece of text that you would then put in your show notes, or you would put in something that accompanies your podcast online. So let's say we want to use that one. So let's go back here. And this is the attribution. So the crediting text is called an attribution. And this is an example of an appropriate attribution of this CC licensed audio file that we searched for. And it's appropriate because it contains the title, it contains the creator, it contains the source, i.e. a hyperlink back to that Openverse listing, and it's appropriate because it contains the type of license. And this is the text that should be included in your show notes or accompanying text to your podcast. Okay, so as I alluded to before, there are other search platforms for this kind of content. And one of the most coolest and most groovy ones, I really like this platform, is called Freesound. So Freesound is a huge collaborative database. There's that word again, collaborative. Database of audio snippets, samples, recordings, all kinds of bleeps and just all kinds of things. And most of these are released under the Creative Commons license that allow their reuse. Now, this is, like I said, a collaborative database, and you need to register for free to use it. But they really encourage you to get involved and to use and to reuse. So get involved and upload your sounds. Share them and let other people use them. I'm going to give you a little demo of that in a minute as well. The Internet Archive. Oh, what a cool thing. This is a non-for-profit library of millions of free books, movies, software, music, websites, and more. And anything, again, in there that has a CC license will clearly be marked with that little circle with the 2 C's in it that I showed you before. Honestly, you could get lost for days in the Internet Archive. I very much encourage you to go and look at it because it's such a brilliant resource. And then this is the Sound Bible. So again, this is a repository of Creative Commons and public domain sound clips. There's lots of sound effects in there for anything. For some or all of the above, their search results may be aggregated, for instance, by the Openverse, but they're still available there. However, for some, the search function or keyword or tagged searches and associated content might be different on these individual platforms. And that's certainly true of Freesound. So I'm just going to show you Freesound now. It's got brilliant search function and it looks really cool. Somebody give me a search term. What shall I search for in Freesound? Anybody got any ideas?
Bird song.
Bird song. Yeah, love it. Okay, let's do that. Bit of bird song. Let's see what we've got. Should we be a bit more specific? Should we say bird song in a particular place?
In West Sussex. West
Sussex. I tell you what, I'm just going to go for Sussex rather than West Sussex. Is that okay?
Oh, sure.
Let's see what we get. Birdsong Sussex. There we go. So here we have, look how beautiful this website is. I love it. It's so beautifully done. So you instantly have all these search results with a little player, which actually is, the little mini player is actually within the search results. It's brilliant. So you can just go and have a tiny little look and a listen before you then go in further into the file itself. Let's listen to the Dawn Chorus on the 11th of June, 2016, in a woodland in Sussex. Why not? And it's beautiful. And there it is, free for you to go and use. Okay, so you can preview, like I said, each of these. And if you go in further, then you get details of the Creative Commons license, and you also get a link to get your attribution text. You can download your sound from here, and you can also see comments from other people that have used it. It's brilliant. I love this website. It's so good. Get involved. Go and look at it. Go and play with it. Go and listen to it. Okay. So, I've just got to go back through these again because for some reason it keeps changing my slide, making me do this again. It wants you to know all about these free search platforms. Okay. So, a second part of, or another part of the ingredients that go to make up a podcast are music. Now then, there are lots and lots of browser-based music creation applications out there, and they are brilliant. The first one is Typotone. I'm going to sound like a broken record here because I absolutely love this application. It's so good. It's so easy to use. I'm going to show you how to use it in a minute. A text to music generator. So you put text in and music comes out magically, and it's amazing. And you can download it. You can do what you like with it. And crucially, it's not subject to any copyright. Acid Machine, brilliant, love it. This is an electronic music generator, well, a beat and music generator. The next one is called WebSynths. This is, again, another electronic music generator. That's a free collection of browser-based musical instruments, including a drum machine and a fully featured polyphonic keyboard. You have to create a free account to be able to download your creations in that one. But there are lots and lots of browser-based music making applications out there, so go and have a play. Now, all three of these examples let you make, record, and download audio. As I said, you might have to sign up to some of them, but they're all free. Okay, let's have a quick demo of Typotone. And incidentally, I find this one, in a creative practice sense, I find this one particularly useful if you really quickly need to create some sort of musical texture or identity to something that at least still has some kind of connection to the topic or content. Okay, where's Typotone gone? There it is. Okay, can somebody else give me a word or a phrase maybe of something that is relevant, I don't know, to something you're working on at the moment, for instance? Give me some words or phrases.
Between the towers.
Between the towers, my goodness. Okay, here we go. This is going to show my spelling now and how awful it is. Okay, so all you do in this is you type your text in and then you listen with this button. How cool is that? It's brilliant. Now, you can change the musical kind of flavor of this, which will give you usually a different style and usually a different instrument. So let's turn it back on. And then we'll... Oh, that's nice. Floaty. Bit more up there. faster, a bit rapid. Bells. Anyway, I'm not going to spend too long here, but this is really useful tool. You download here. You can use this if you prefer, so you can use it on a tablet or a phone as well. It's dead accessible. Love it. It's great. Okay. Hypertone. Oh, it's making me do this again. I'm terribly sorry. You're going to have to look at all three of these again. Hypertone, Acid Machine, and WebSynths. But like I say, there are loads out there. One thing to note here is that the people that make these are often a bit transitory. So you might find they're only up there for a little bit and then something else will take its place. And that does happen. But Hypertone has been around for ages, actually, as have these other two. Okay. All right, so we talked about some of the other ingredients. Let's talk about the recording scenarios now of voice recordings. So, first of all, before we talk about monologue recordings, if at all possible, it is best if you can to aim to have a separate recording for each person who's speaking. This makes the edit so much easier. And I'll expand on this in the tech focus session that I'll give next week. But it also helps with things like if you've got people who kind of interrupt a lot, you've got a lot of crosstalk of people talking over each other, it's much easier to then edit a session if you do have a separate recording of each person's voice. Okay, so our recording scenarios. So a single speaker, sometimes called a monologue, that's just one person's voice and one mic. Okay, then we've got a conversation or an interview, usually two people speaking and one usually as a host or an interviewer. Then we've got multi-person sessions, sometimes called panel discussions. 3 or 4 voices here is a good number to aim for, usually with one as a host or a chair. As a listener, that's a manageable number of voices to listen to. If you're not watching as well, if you're just listening, and indeed to be able to discern who's speaking and to keep up with change of speakers. Any more than, I would say, 4, or at a push perhaps 5, any more than 4 voices can start to get messy in your head as a listener, and it can be difficult to listen to and to take in that information from and to keep track of who's speaking. Okay, and increasingly people are recording podcasts or podcast content online via online meetings. So online platforms often have a setting to record a separate audio track for each speaker, and this is certainly true for Zoom. Other platforms are available. You will, in that situation, you'll end up with one mixed audio track of all the voices, but you'll also end up with one for each voice. And increasingly, this is being used especially to interview people in a remote sense, but beware. You will be at the mercy of yours and your guests' bandwidth and internet connection. So in this scenario, it's always worth doing a pre-meeting to decide whether this is a viable option. And you can check your interviewee's equipment, you can check their situation, and you can check their bandwidth. Not unlike a sort of pre-meeting that you might do in an interview sense. There are other paid-for subscription-based online audio recording platforms, including things like Descript, Riverside, and Podcastle, all of which use AI technology and some of which offer editing tools as well. But again, like I said, those are all paid for. Okay, not going to go too much in depth here, but field recording. Field recording is a term that's used to describe an audio recording that's made outside of a studio setup. And that can apply to both natural and human-made sounds. Now, going back to bedding audio and what I was talking about audio beds before, these are often made from field recordings. So the sounds of traffic in a city or birdsong, for instance, help to situate another piece of audio, and they help to situate you and us as listeners. You may already have field recordings, maybe that you found through CC license searches, but making your own can be great fun. I would watch out for things like wind noise and rain, but go out there and have a go. Okay, recording kit. Now, I won't spend too much time here, but I'm going to give you a brief overview of the kit that's available to you that Flux currently has. So, firstly, there is a kit with a Zoom P4 pod track and 4 lapel mics. Now, this is super easy to use. It's got a level control, so the amount of input coming in for each channel. It's got 4 headphone outputs, each with their own independent volume, and it's got 4 assignable sample pads, should you wish to play in sound effects or other samples live whilst recording. I must confess I've never used the function on mine personally, as I prefer to have control of that in the resulting edit. And you can use this kit for recording up to 4-person spoken word recording. Okay. The second piece of kit is a Zoom H4n. I absolutely love this piece of kit. It's brilliant. It does so many things. This is a little bit more involved piece of kit, but it's great for field recording. So you see the 2 things that are sticking out of the top of it like that? That's a stereo mic. And that can be used to get really good stereo recordings. And it can also take 2 other mics at the bottom. There's 2 inputs at the bottom of it, XLR inputs. So this could be used to record 2 people having a conversation outside, for instance, where you would record the stereo ambience, so the field recording, at the same time as the 2 vocal channels, the two microphones for each person speaking. Now, thirdly, there are also a few of these. This is the Zoom H1n. Again, these are really, really super easy to use. These are one-touch stereo recording. And again, there is stereo recording. You can see those 2 mics sticking up in an X shape at the top. These can also take an external mic via a mini jack connection. And these are really, really great for using in workshops, particularly for participants who are beginners and particularly kids. Kids love these. They're small, they're easy to use, they're portable. And the last of those 2, the last 2 of those, sorry, the H4n and the H1n can both come with screw-in handles, which are essential to sort of eliminate handling noise. And they also sometimes come with a wind jammer to help tame wind noise. So if accessories are provided with kit that you've got access to, I'd encourage you to use them. Okay, so we talked a little bit about kit. I'm briefly going to touch on input levels. I won't go into too much detail again because we'll talk about this in the next session. This is an audio level meter, and audio input is measured in decibels, what's sometimes called or shortened to dB. And in this image that you can see, that's the number scale in the middle, and 0 dB is the loudest audio input there is, and it's to be avoided, as sounds at this level will be distorting or on their way to being distorted, which some people call clipping or clipped. Now, level meters are often color coded. You've probably seen them on various different bits of kit and gear, and they're often color coded green, yellow, and red, with anything up to about -12 dB in green, anything between about -12 and -3 in yellow, and anything above this in red. And that's a good kind of rule of thumb in terms of, you know, it's a traffic light signal. Essentially, green's pretty good, yellow's getting a bit hot, and red is too much. And often when things are distorting, we might say they're going in the red or they're hitting the red. And that's what we mean. They're getting too hot, they're getting too loud. You'll also notice in this image that there are 2 lines. So there's one for the left channel and one for the right channel. And this is a really easy way to tell that this is a stereo recording. If it's a mono recording, there would be just one line here. Okay. A good recording level to aim for in spoken word recordings is peaking at around -18 to -12. And that's why it's always worth asking a few questions as tests to get a level for each of your speakers. Personally, I often ask people what they had for breakfast. And I'll elaborate on that question to keep them talking while I adjust the input level accordingly. And that often breaks the tension too in a situation perhaps where people are unused to doing something like this. And for field recordings in terms of level, we're usually looking for a lower level than spoken word, but that really does depend on the nature of the recording itself. And secondly, we talk here about the importance of monitoring on headphones. So we're not just monitoring with our eyes, but you're monitoring with your headphones and listening to what's happening at the same time. There are your headphones. Okay. Everybody still with me? Nobody fallen off? Yay, good. Okay, thank you for your thumbs up. Thank you for still being here. Right, structure. Okay, planning. I love a bit of planning. Now, planning, I think planning is absolutely key. Planning your session in terms of its structure and questions, as well as its connecting sections. So things like summaries and introductions to sections. This planning, it helps to set expectations, and those expectations of your audience, but also of your guests as well, because they have expectations too. How detailed your plan is totally up to you. You know, some people like to script things verbatim to the letter, and other people simply like to have some bullet points or some prompts for sections or questions. That's completely up to you. But if your guests are given a clear idea of what you expect from them, and they have time prior to think about their response, then you create an atmosphere where there is space for that off the cuff, off-piste, little magic moment kind of scenario. But I think that little magic moment scenario only happens when there's been some pre-thought and planning beforehand. Another myth buster, I think podcasts that have that off the cuff feel or that just sort of happened feel are often the ones that are best planned and prepared for. Planning is key. Love a bit of planning. Okay, duration. I am a less is more kind of girl. I think it helps you focus your content. And it's not unlike the process of perhaps, I don't know, writing an artist statement, maybe. You've got to distill your ideas down to their key points or takeaways. And also, with shorter pieces, shorter audio pieces, there's always more chance of engaging the audience for longer and hopefully getting your audience to commit and to give of themselves to you for the full performance. I would say when you start off podcasting and making this kind of content, aim for 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes, something like that. No more than that. Certainly no more than 30 minutes when you're first starting out. Keep it short and sweet. And then we've got more chance of more people engaging for the full amount of time. Okay, a bit more on structure. And you might recognize this. This is not reinventing the wheel in any way, shape or form. And you might recognize it from kind of creative writing conventions. So you've got a beginning, and in your beginning or your intro, some people might call it, you've got a clear outline of what will happen in the podcast, what topics will be covered, who will be talking about them, and what the audience might gain or know by listening, the what's in it for me. What's in it for them giving themselves to you for that amount of time that the podcast is. The middle, the meat and potatoes, the main event, the conversations and interviews. Try to get your guests to provide sort of real world examples to things they're discussing. Again, that might happen in a pre-meeting that you might have with your guest, or examples your audience can relate to. For monologue style recordings, try to use analogies for situations or concepts that you're exploring, again, relatable to your audience. You can also split your content into sections using the other ingredients we talked about previously, like music and sound effects, for instance, as audio punctuation, allowing your piece to breathe a bit, and in turn allowing your audience to pause with it and take in your content. And the end, well, the ending is often where you might include a call to arms. So a suggestion about where to get more information, where to learn more, or where to even get involved. There'll often, prior to that, be a summary of key points. And you can also signpost to further reading and further listening, perhaps in your show notes. So you're accompanying text to a podcast. Okay. The use of questions within the structure of your podcast, I think, can be super, super effective. By organizing your content or topic into a series of questions, again, you set up an expectation with your listener that you will, if not answer them, then at least address them in some way. So you're kind of signposting to your audience. And again, speaking of expectations, your guests have them too. So like I said before, giving them prior sight of questions and topic areas that you might want to cover, and even if possible, a rough idea of how much time you'd like them to spend on each question or area. Again, you're setting up and managing that expectation, and it means you're providing the appropriate conducive atmosphere for that kind of those little magic moments to appear. So for instance, for your topic, for instance, questions like, why is blah blah important? Or what does blah blah mean for the future of? All those kinds of questions that are kind of helping us as an audience kind of digest and manage and guide our way through your content. Okay, back to scripts or onto scripts in terms of structure. So don't be afraid of using a crib sheet or a script of any sort. Again, as I talked about before, how detailed it is completely up to you. But as I mentioned previously, it will no doubt depend on your style of presenting things more generally. You might be a verbatim kind of person, you might be a bullet points, you might even be a pictures kind of person. But some kind of prompt, some kind of script, some kind of crib sheet. Key to this, when you're recording, just watch out for rustling paper on recordings. Nobody wants to hear that. So if you have got a script that goes over, for instance, 2 pages, just make sure that you don't have a particular section that goes over a page. So use page breaks wisely and accordingly so that you can stop, pause, turn the page and then move on. And we don't have to listen to the paper rustling. And also, from scripts and from writing them, or for writing your bullet points, be prepared for some words to be what I call a bit sticky. So sometimes things are a bit difficult to say out loud. You might write something and think it's brilliant, and then you start reading it in your head and it becomes very different, or it sounds very different, and it becomes very difficult to read out. And in that scenario, the thesaurus, that's really hard to say as well. The thesaurus is your friend. So get that up while you're doing it, and be able to go and look for, don't be scared to go and find another word that means the same thing, but perhaps easier to say, or easier to say in an associated phrase. Okay. Sorry, these last few slides are a bit text heavy, but there is some text that's important here. So recording space and facilities. So organisations you're working with may have dedicated facilities or quiet spaces which you can use. If not, I suggest you choose somewhere small, somewhere quiet, and avoid rooms off noisy corridors that have lots of footfall. So a corridor that is used constantly all day, got people going in and out, that's a really bad idea. Try and find somewhere that's a bit more off the beaten track. It's going to have less footfall. It's always good practice to tell other people that you share space with, or indeed bandwidth with, about what you're doing, and just politely ask them to make considerations to keep noise down to a minimum and footfall down to a minimum whilst you're recording. Rooms with things like carpets, rugs, and soft furnishings will always generally sound better than those without. And on that note, I would avoid places to record like bathrooms and kitchens. They're full of super reflective material like tiles, steel, stuff that is just going to make a horrible sound, and you're going to get room tone that's going to be a bit horrible. So avoid spaces like that, or if you possibly can. And in terms of remote recordings, always try and privilege your bandwidth. So also always be asking those that you share your Wi-Fi connection with not to download or upload whilst you're recording, and advise your guests to do the same. And again, you can do all that in a pre-meeting for online recordings. You can remind guests to dot those I's and cross those T's. Okay, performance. Hydration to avoid that clicky mouth. That, you heard that? Sometimes hear it on the radio. It's horrible, isn't it? It's horrible in your ears to listen to. Now then, clicky mouth is just dehydration. And the way you stop that is to drink some water. And if you can, try and start getting hydrated the day before, and your guests as well. So if you've got someone that's particularly predisposed to it, get them to drink as much water as they can. There is a sound recordist, it's sort of a myth, that says if you eat an apple whilst you're doing a recording, somebody that's got a really clicky mouth, it will get rid of it. I think it does, but only for about 10 minutes, and then it's back. So if you can, just drink some water, and water is good for everybody. Okay, especially if people are new to this, a lot of people just start off too fast. They're just perhaps a bit nervous. They just want to get it all out, say what they need to say. I would just encourage everyone to slow down a little bit, to take a few deep breaths in and out. That can do wonders. Okay. In terms of your situation, I would make sure that people are wearing comfortable, non-rustling clothes. So stuff like outdoor gear is not the one. And that can be an issue actually if you're doing a recording outside, for instance. Let's say we're walking about a nature reserve and we're having this beautiful conversation, but somebody's got a really crunchy jacket on. You're going to hear it a lot. So try and head off things like that at the pass, as well as stuff like jewelry. Lots of kind of jingly jangly things will make a sound. We don't want those on our recording if we can possibly help it. Make sure you're not hungry. Rumbling tummies on a podcast are not the one. Nobody wants to listen to that, or I don't want to listen to that anyway. And again, have a drink to hand. It's just about making yourself as comfortable as you can be. Reading your crib sheets, again, like I said before, just beware of the paper rustle and beware of sections that span two sides. And for everybody, switch your notifications off. In fact, just switch your phone off. Rather than on silent, if your phone is on silent, you will sometimes hear it do that that sound, and that is your phone trying to connect to the network. So even if it's on silent, it's still trying to make that connection. The best thing to do is either switch them off or put them on airplane mode, which means they won't be connected to the network anymore. Okay. Whew. I feel like I said all that really fast, or I didn't take a breath. I'm sorry. Okay, compliance, the boring but necessary stuff. So we talked a bit about copyright compliance before. I can provide a really straightforward consent form with a drive link, and I can send that to Flux afterwards. That is a form that's actually made for, it's for AV content, so it's for audio and video, but it will do the job. And that way you're just getting written consent from participants or interviewees. If you're working with younger participants, for instance, you'll need to be DBS checked, and you'll need consent from a parent or guardian, and that parent or guardian will need to sign that consent form I just talked about. If you're doing location recording in buildings, in institutional buildings, for instance, make sure that you yourself and your guests are aware of things like the fire alarm protocols, so where the exits are and the meeting points, the nearest toilets. So that's all kind of duty of care stuff. And again, the same goes for guests with access needs like lifts and stuff like that. All duty of care. And the last bit on this compliance slide is about the CC attributions in your show notes. So that's what I showed you about the attribution text. Okay. So I'm not going to spend too much time here, as I'm going to cover more of this in the technical partner session. Once you've done your recording, you attach your recorder to a computer and it will appear as a new drive. You then copy your files to the computer. Now, the importance of renaming, I'm going to do that again. I cannot stress this enough. Rename your files, because you know if you don't, oh my goodness, you're going to get in a right tangle. And I cannot tell you how many times I've received a file that's called podcast or recording. And I'm like, what podcast? What recording? And when I start, if I don't rename those instantly, then I will get completely lost. So rename, and I would suggest that you rename with something like who and when and where, and that way you can manage your files in a much more organized way. You can, just as a side note there, you can use a phone to record. I don't personally, it's not the one, but some people do it to varying degrees of success. iPhones certainly generally used to have better mics and therefore produce better audio voice recordings, but Android is catching up in that respect. And further, you can use the clouds to kind of very easily store and transfer recordings when you make a phone recording. However, separate audio recorders will always give you a better recording than a phone, and that's mainly because with an audio recorder, you essentially have control over how much that resulting file is compressed, if at all. Quick explainer of file compression. This might work for visual artists. The difference, for instance, between a JPEG and a TIFF. A TIFF is an uncompressed file. So that is everything that the camera thought, well, it's all the information the camera took. That's your TIFF. A JPEG is a compression of that TIFF. So a JPEG is the camera or the computer saying, oh, you don't need that bit, you don't need that bit, you don't need this bit, making it smaller, but crucially, it's deciding what information is there and what's not. And for me, I want all the information, and then I want to decide what happens with it, what we do with it, what we compress, what we change, what we do with it. Okay. And we talked about renaming. So just quickly, a few bits on edit. Audacity is amazing. If you don't know about Audacity now, go out straight after this, go and get it downloaded. An absolutely amazing resource. It's free, it's open source, it's cross-platform. It is a multi-track audio editing and recording piece of software. And free here is not just like no cost, although there is no cost, but free as in freedom. So this is free open source software, and it gives you the freedom to not only use the program, but to study how it works, to improve it, and to share it with others. It's very, very cool. If you're interested in that as a concept more generally, go and look at the Free Software Foundation. Amazing. Okay, I'll stop going on about Audacity, but it is brilliant. For Mac users, I'm just thinking about kind of free, as in no cost solutions for editing. For Mac users, GarageBand is native to Mac computers. It's predominantly a music creation studio, and it comes free with all Mac computers, like I've said. However, it is capable of multi-track audio recording, and it can be used to edit audio files as well. So if you're a Mac user, that's something that's native to your computer and is in it straight away, ready to go. Now then, there are loads of, again, browser-based audio editors out there. Now, again, I must confess, I haven't used any of these. I'm a Mac user personally, and I use something called Logic Pro. Some of these might be more geared towards music creation. They are all capable of multi-track audio editing. However, we might be a little bit wary of trying to edit longer files than anything browser-based, but they could be a really good way to get a quick idea for how editing audio feels, how it looks, and how it sounds. So there's a couple of key ones there, but again, there are loads out there. Audio Mass, Audio Tool, Twisted Wave. Twisted Wave in particular is one that's used a lot on iPads and in mobile sense. Okay. Okay, a quick little bit about hosting. So there's a really good explainer there from the podcast host. Again, that's in the links at the end. It's a good explainer of a list of hosting sites, including some free options as well. Organizations may have their own platforms, their own hosting. So for instance, existing SoundCloud accounts or Spotify accounts. SoundCloud can work really well for short form limited series, and it will give you up to 3 hours of storage for free. YouTube, again, can work for short form. It's free, but you will need an image. So it will be hosted like a video, and it will need to be edited together as a piece of video rather than as just a piece of audio. If you find yourself wanting to make something that has more episodes and a wider reach, it's worth looking at paid hosting sites, which in turn will generate an RSS feed for you, going back to what I was talking to at the beginning, and which in turn will make your content more accessible to more people, usually via search criteria. This is the Universal Sign Language for search, just decided. Right, okay. This is the point where I would normally kind of open things up and ask for questions and comment and discussion. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. Okay. Let's stop. We can either have a little short comfort break now. What time is it? It's 4:40, or we can go straight into conversation, discussion, questions. Up to you. What do you think? Straight in, says Natasha. All right. Everybody agree?
I agree.
Cool. Okay. All right. Thanks. Whew, let me take a breath. I feel like I said about 1 million words then.
Yes.
First of all, can I just preface, that's not the right word, because suffix, can I just suffix what I've just said with, that is just my opinion. That is just how I do it. Now, especially in Techland, in the next session, if you come to the next session, there are myriad ways to do things, and you'll find a way that works for you. But you know, those are just my ways of doing things, and you will undoubtedly find other ways, and hopefully share them with each other or other people on the internet and collaborate and get involved. And just before we start discussion, if there's anything that I don't know or I can't find out, I'll know somebody who does, or I'll find it out for you and I'll send it to Flux. Is that okay? All right, the floor is yours.
Okay, I have a question.
Hi, what's your name?
I'm Anani.
Hi, Anani. How you doing?
I'm great, thanks. I'm wondering about the last slide you showed, and you mentioned the hosting sites, and I got 2 of them. That was the last slide where I failed to get all the information. Are you gonna send us a link to this, or?
Yeah, so basically
Okay.
I'll package this up as a PDF, and at the end of the PDF is a list of links of all the things that I've talked about. So all the examples and also all the kind of applications and browser-based bits and pieces. Is that all right?
That's all right.
Cool.
This is wonderful. There's so much new information for me, and I was sort of puzzled and confused before about entering the world of podcasts, but now it's starting to sort out.
That is music to my ears. Thank you very much. Podcasting is to anybody. Go out there and do it. You know,
Yeah.
why not? As long as you think about it a bit and there's a bit of forethought and planning.
Uh-huh.
Evan, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I'm. Are you? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, that's grand. I'm currently volunteering with a group of disabled artists at Artworks based in Sheffield.
Mm-hmm.
They've expressed an interest in wanting to come up with a podcast based around their practice, which is they're doing workshops with collaborative sketchbooks. And I think that it's really interesting to capture what it is that they're doing and the conversations that they have. Issue that I have is that much as I'm going to be the host of it and telling people what they're doing, I want to be sort of hands off in I can direct questions at them, but given the fact that they have sort of special educational needs and disabilities, if they go off on tangents, it's great in terms of capturing that information, but from the perspective of a potential listener, they might not get the flow. So I'm just wondering whether there's an approach that, or a similar podcast to sort of guide me in that direction, or how you would approach it.
Again, I'm going to go back to structure and planning, and I think planning is going to be key, and maybe collaborative planning. Maybe planning is something that you do in session with your participants. So I do work with the LD community sometimes, and it can often be a very iterative process. It can often be the same thing over and over and over again. So maybe there's something there about actually agreeing with the group themselves what a particular stretch of time looks like, and perhaps what the goal needs to be for that next 20 minutes. You know, what we, and starts like that with that kind of detailed structure. Let me park that and just reflect on some of the last things that I've done with Under the Stars. A lot of time in group, I think if people in groups feel like they've got a job, and you what's the word? Oh my goodness, menopause brain. What's the word? And
cycle.
That you cycle those jobs. So for instance, we just did a piece of work with Under the Stars. A part of that was some spoken word recordings, but each time we gave someone the floor and the mic, somebody had a job, and there was a job where somebody was recording, there was a job where somebody was clapping in, there was a job maybe where somebody went out to make sure that everybody knew what was happening, so that the whole group is continually involved and that everybody gets a chance to do each of those jobs. That can help with kind of structure and management, although perhaps I'm talking more about session management there, but
I have an idea too.
Yeah, go for it.
The Native American talking stick. And so, whoever's holding the stick gets to talk. And along with that, like somebody could be in charge of a little, what is it called, where the sand flows through the hourglass?
Yeah, we use that a lot. We use countdown a lot in terms of making music in those kinds of scenarios. So you've got a minute, and you can see the minute going down and down and down. And at that next minute, you've got to, I don't know, change key, slow down, speed up, get really quiet, get really loud. But those kind of markers of time, you're really right there, and distance, and like distance within time work really well as well.
Yes. And the more they
says they've got to go. Goodbye.
Sorry. The more they participate in managing it, the more conscious they become about it. It becomes theirs.
Absolutely. And
we're
ownership is
conscientious.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
ownership. I don't care who you are. If you feel like you're in charge and you own something, that you have some autonomy, then there you go. You're off.
That's,
Yeah.
that's the sort of feeling and the agency that I want to give to the artist that I'm working with. So I want them to feel that it's theirs, not just mine.
Yes.
I think that I'll get there. I think I'm just sort of overthinking things for the moment, and I think it's just a case of do it and it'll find its feet.
Absolutely. And if you've got the luxury of having that amount of time in session to be able to kind of, just roll your sleeves up and get involved, making through doing is kind of what we all do, isn't it?
Yeah.
I just thought of something else then when you said that. You could turn the host scenario on its head a bit, and you could just have, instead of having one host for a session or for an episode, you could have lots of different hosts, and that might just focus things down again a bit more. And again, a way of being more structure for the participants.
We've got just less than 10 minutes, Kitty. So should we go to another question? We've got Noah next.
Yeah.
Hello. So I currently project lead on a podcast in Rotherham called State of the Arts Podcast. We've been very fortunate that we've got access to a studio in Rotherham, so it's all been really hunky-dory, but we're about to take the podcast out of the studio and put it inside a festival. Now, thankfully, I've secured it with a local business. It's a more quieter setting, so I'm not really worried about that. We've got a sound engineer and everything, but when we talked about copyright and stuff like that, this is a really ridiculous question, but the venue we're using is a record shop, so they sell vinyls and stuff like that. So I know that I won't be able to have their music going on in the background with all the different artists and stuff that they hold in their archive. But something that we really wanted to do is like a prompt, because it's kind of like an open book for participants of the festival to kind of just get involved and have their 2 pence. Was to use the records as a way of prompting. So like, look over in the festival, what sort of song do you think of, or can you find that record in there, as a way of promoting the local business? Are we allowed to do that? Because we do record as well for comms and stuff. Are we allowed to get a Diana Ross hit and bring it to the camera and be like, this is my hit and this is why?
Do you mean just bring it to the camera? Or
yeah, I'm not going to play it. God, no. I'm not trying to take up being a DJ.
Do you know what? I don't know. But I don't see why not. I mean, it's ephemera. It's a thing. It's like, people hold up books and not find any, but do you know what I mean?
And people reference it. You can't go, you may say, I'm going to use Diana Ross as an example again, so forgive me, but you may say, oh, I love that song by Diana Ross. You can't really copyright that. So I just wondering more visually, because we just record it purely for comms, if we were allowed to do that or not.
Personally, I don't see why not. But so will this be kind of streaming live?
No, God, no. So it's just to pop up for 2 hours, and then Will, our guy from Tuned In Music School, will go back and cut it down to about 30, 45 minutes, as we know that it's either going to be something that's really inundated or something that's quite calm and quiet. But we do have a host that's there for the whole session. It's just more, I wanted to know if we were allowed to do it, because I just think it'd be a bit visually nicer than 2 people sat down. Because we've got a lot of those visuals, so it's just more working with our funders to make sure we're doing different types of visuals and stuff like that to kind of bank it.
I don't see why not, but I'm not sure that I would kind of plug my.
I'm coming for you. If you're wrong, I'm coming.
I don't want I'm not totally sure, but I will see if I can find out and get.
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Kitty.
No problem. So just to be clear, this is a piece of an LP,
yes,
a piece of album artwork, and you just want to hold it up to a camera that will then, and that thing that you make, that video that you make, will then be hosted somewhere on the interwebs.
Yeah, it'll be on Instagram, for example. It'll be a reel. That's the be all and end all of it, really. Yeah.
All right, let me find out.
Thank you.
To be sure, but just to be clear, I wasn't here. If that's not the case, it wasn't me. Okay. Any more? The last 5 or so minutes. Hello. Hand up. Hayley.
Can you put it in the chat? Ah.
Oh.
I think that's she can't do it. Send the question afterwards, Hayley, and I'll get Kitty to answer it.
Oh, hang on.
Oh. How can I practice? Can I have a go?
How can I practice?
So Kitty, can I come in on this?
Yes,
because
of course.
Flux, we've bought a kind of the kit that Kitty talked about. Also hard to say, but quite nice. We've bought a full kit. So what we were going to do after the 2 sessions is have a day with Kitty and invite people to come in, not like for a full day, but to kind of come in and have a bit of have a go, a bit of a play, a bit of a, can we, work these things out together? So you might want to come in for like half an hour and just have a little bit of a fiddle around and do some of that, because I'm not technical at all. And for me, hands-on is the only way that I learn. So this is amazing. But I would also need to have a go. Hayley, agree with you. So Kitty, we did talk about that. She's looking at me like really like, no.
No, we did. Sorry, I'm just realizing that rather remiss of me. I missed somebody in the chat right at the beginning saying they couldn't hear me.
Yeah, no, it was Kathy. It was a problem with her computer.
Okay.
I responded. But yeah, so we haven't put a date in for that, but we thought we'd just kind of talk to people who came to the training and see when people are available to do that, if that's something of interest.
Yeah, I think that's really useful to spend time with gear and just to get to, see how it feels and how it works and be, have that confidence with it before you then take it into a session or go and interview somebody or whatever it is you're going to do. Of course. Any more questions? If it's about the meaning of life, I cannot help. It is only Monday. Nothing good will come of that. Thanks. Is that Rosie saying goodbye? Goodbye. Thank you. Any more? Anybody else want to ask me anything? Or ask anybody? Oh, Frank. Frank has a question.
Frank says, we're in Rotherham. I'm in Donny. So we're in the centre of Rotherham, Frank. Based at Voluntary Action Rotherham, which is 10 minutes walk from the train station. And the podcast kit will be available really for use in Rotherham. So it's capital funding that's kind of based in Rotherham, because we're the Creative People and Places programme here. But we will have a laptop here that people can kind of come and use. Kit can be taken off site, but then we would ask that people edit here if you haven't got your own editing equipment, because we obviously can't allow laptops to go off site and so on.
I'm actually on the border, Mexborough.
Oh, well, you're almost.
Swinton is...
If you put a leg in Swinton, then
we'll do it in Swinton.
With that in mind, actually, if you're going to use that, I'd suggest that with you, you've got some external storage, so you can take those files away with you, so they don't, because that will otherwise that laptop will very quickly become clogged up with all kinds of people's stuff. Okay.
Brilliant.
Again, back to file management. Love a bit of file management. I'm so boring.
If anybody, I think we have to close up, but if anybody hasn't got the link for next week, if anybody hasn't got a place, Shamila did email me and I've said I'll email the link round afterwards. We will email that, and anybody that's come today will get on that, because there might have been people that just booked on the technical session that have filled it up. But I think if you think it's really useful to do both. Thank you, Kitty. That was so useful.
You are very, very welcome.
Enjoyed it. Very engaging.
Lovely to meet you all. Go forth and create.
Thank you, Kitty.
Thanks, everybody.